Well, it's 7:30 and we have a full house, so I guess we'll start. Good evening, anyone. Okay, now I can start. Good evening, everyone. My name is Michael Moosberger, and I'm the University Archivist and Manager of Archives and Special Collections here in the Dalhousie University Library. It's my great pleasure to welcome you tonight to our first Canadian Literary Collections Project reading for the 2011-2012 year. And it's so wonderful to see a great turnout to listen to a great writer this evening. Tonight we continue the tradition that we started back in 2005 by having this year's winner of the Thomas Head Rattle Atlantic Fiction Award, Kathleen Winter, as our guest reader. We hold this reading annually to remember and celebrate the life and work of Thomas Riddell, arguably Nova Scotia's greatest writer, and acknowledge the continuing contribution his name lends to Nova Scotia's literary heritage. It also provides us with an opportunity to continue to make people aware of his personal and professional archive of diaries, letters, literary manuscripts, and photographs and public works which are held here in the Dalhousie University Archives and Special Collections, and which are available for research use by anyone interested. As you may have noticed as you exited the elevators this evening, and if you haven't, when you leave this evening, you can take a look. We have set up a small exhibit to highlight not only Dr. Riddell, but also the award that bears his name, as well as the Writers' Federation of Nova Scotia, which established the Riddell Atlantic Fiction Award in 1990. Coincidentally, we are also the official repository for the records of the Writers' Federation of Nova Scotia. And over the summer, thanks to a Young Canada Works internship grant, we were finally able to process the entire collection of materials that we have received from the Federation since 1990. Our intern, Jesse Bach, just put the final touches on the finding aid less than a month ago. So it's great pleasure that I present the WFNS's Executive Director, Nate Crawford, with a DVD copy of the finding aid. In the near future, the entire finding aid will be mounted on the DUAS website for everyone to have access to. I'd also like to welcome our newly appointed university librarian, Donna Bourne-Tyson, who's sitting over there. You have an opportunity to meet and talk to Donna after the reading. And now I'd like to turn things over to Nate, who will introduce Kathleen Winter. Thanks for coming out, and enjoy the reading.
Thank you very much for this. I was late coming in because I was out staring at the photos. This will be certainly an aid for us. We were just speaking about a photo we got another copy of is out there on display, and it was about 3.5 minutes ago that I finally identified the final person in it. So the value of an archive right there. Yes, so where are my notes? So I'm here to introduce this writer over here. The writer you are about to meet was born in England, raised in Newfoundland, and currently makes her home in Montreal. Kathleen Winter began her career as a script writer for Sesame Street before becoming a columnist for the Telegram in St. John's. And her debut short story collection, Boys, was published in 2007 and went on to win the Winterset Award and the Metcalf Rook Award. The novel you're about to meet, if you haven't already, is Annabelle. Published in 2010, Annabelle became a shortlisted nominee for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize, and the Governor General's Award for Fiction, holding the distinction of being the only novel recognized by all three of those awards in 2010. In 2011, it was shortlisted for the Orange Prize for Fiction and became the 21st book awarded the Thomas Head Riddell Atlantic Fiction Prize. Congratulations, Kathleen, and please join me in welcoming Kathleen Winter.
Thank you, Nate, and thank you all for coming. And I just want to say how grateful I am to the Thomas Head Riddell Fiction Prize for awarding me this honor. I appreciate it so much. and it's given me financial help, and it's given me the great honor of winning this prize, and it's a wonderful thing for a writer to have that happen. You know, writing a book that becomes successful and has readers is a surprise to me, as I suppose it is a surprise to anybody to whom it happens, because preceding that, for me, were many, many years of that not happening, of that really not happening. And of just writing ever since I can remember. And it's really only when you have a certain amount of apprenticeship built up, and then you have certain kinds of good fortune. In my case, it included the good fortune of having 2 amazing editors. And I sometimes think the editor's name should be on the book too, because the editor is the person who takes things from being a bit fuzzy here and there, or just not quite right at the end, or almost okay, but something lacking, to it being the kind of book that people actually want to read from cover to cover, which is the great luck that I've had with this book. And I'm really grateful to the people who've helped me to do it. I used to think that writing was a solitary activity. It is a solitary activity most of the time, but the people who help you are a true community of people. They might be a small community, but they are a community, and I really appreciate them. And the other part of the equation is the reader. I thank the reader in the back of this book. I've been a reader all my life, ever since my dad taught me to read phonetically before I went to school. And to me, the reader really writes half of the book. The reader is the one that fills in all the visuals. The reader is the one who goes, oh yeah, that's like when this thing happened to someone I know. The reader is the one who, you know, sets aside this time and this mental space. And the reader is the one who is the house, the cinema, in which the book becomes a living story with colors and shapes and dialogue. And the reader really does half of the work. So I'm going to read 3 sections. One is from the beginning of the book, and it will help illustrate how I feel personally about the land of Labrador. The land of Labrador walloped me when I first went there. I couldn't believe the magnetic power that it had over me. I didn't want to go back home. I cried when the plane came to take me away from there. And I've been back many times. Anything that's about the land and the landscape in this book is something that I felt myself when I was there. Can people hear me at the back? Okay. Wayne Blake was born at the beginning of March during the first signs of spring breakup of the ice, a time of great importance to Labradorians who hunted ducks for food. And he was born, like most children in that place in 1968, surrounded by women his mother had known all her married life: Joan Martin, Eliza Gowdy, Thomasina Bakey. Women who knew how to ice fish and sew caribou hide moccasins and stack wood in a pile that would not fall down in the months when their husbands walked the trap lines. Women who would know during any normal birth exactly what was required. The village of Croydon Harbour on the southeast Labrador coast has that magnetic earth all Labrador shares. You sense a striation, a pulse, as the land drinks light and emits a vibration. Sometimes you can see it with your naked eye, stripes of light coming off the land. Not every traveler senses it, but those who do keep looking for it in other places, and they find it nowhere but desert and mesa. A traveler could come from New York and feel it. Explorers, teachers, people who know good hot coffee and densely printed newspapers, but who want something more fundamental, an injection of new world in their blood. Real new world, not a myth that has led to highways and more highways and the low radioactive buildings that offer pancakes and hamburgers and gasoline on those highways. A traveler can come to Labrador and feel its magnetic energy or not feel it. There has to be a question in the person. The visitor has to be an open circuit, available to the power coming off the land. And not everybody is. And it is the same with a person born in Labrador. Some know from birth that their homeland has a respiratory system, that it pulls energy from rock and mountain and water and gravitational activity beyond Earth, and that it breathes energy in return, and others don't know it. Wayne was born in Bathwater in the house of his parents, Treadway and Jacinta Blake. Treadway belonged to Labrador, but Jacinta did not. Treadway had kept the trap lines of his father, and he was magnetized to the rocks, whereas Jacinta had come from St. John's when she was 18 to teach in the little school in Croydon Harbour because she thought, before she met Treadway, that it would be an adventure. It would enable her to teach in a St. John's school once she had 3 or 4 years of experience behind her. "I would eat a lunch of bread and jam every day," Joan Martin told Eliza and Thomasina as Jacinta went through her fiercest labor pains in the bathtub. Every woman in Croydon Harbour spoke at one time or another of how she might enjoy living on her own. The women indulged in this dream when their husbands had been home from the trap lines too long. "I would not need any supper except a couple of boiled eggs, and I'd read a magazine in bed every single night." "I'd wear the same clothes for a week," Eliza said. "My blue wool pants, grey shirt with my nightie stuffed under them. I would never take off my nightie from September till June, and I would get a cat instead of our dogs, and I would save up for a piano." The women did not wish away their husbands out of animosity. It was just that the unendurable winters were all about hauling wood and saving every last piece of marrow, and longing for the intimacy they imagined would exist when their husbands came home, all the while knowing the intimacy would always be imaginary. Then came brief blasts of summer when fireweed and pitcher plants and bog sundews burst open and gave the air one puff, one tantalizing scented breath that signaled life could now begin. But it did not begin. The plants were carnivorous. That moment of summer contained desire and fruition and death all in one ravenous gulp, and the women did not jump in. They waited for the moment of summer to expand around them, to expand enough to contain women's lives, and it never did. So that's a little bit about the land and about the families and the family that Wayne Annabelle was born into. Wayne Annabelle was brought up as Wayne. He was not told that at birth he had both female and male characteristics. It had been surgically changed and hidden from him. The reason I wrote a book about such a child was that someone came to my house during the summer. I lived in the woods, and I never had any visitors all winter. This was in Newfoundland. All winter long, it'd be me and the wood stove and the jars of jam and the pickles that I'd made and my goat and a few chickens. In the summer, there'd be all kinds of people coming by. "Hi, we just stopped in on our way around the bay." And I always liked to listen. And one of them told me a story of an intersex child. They told me the story of a child who was born both male and female. And it was the first time I had heard that there could be such a thing. I knew a lot about different kinds of being on the gender spectrum. But this acquaintance of mine called the child a hermaphrodite. We don't use that term now. The term is intersex. But in 1968, the term would have been hermaphrodite. But when I heard it, I thought of that as a mythological thing. I had thought of it as, the product of Hermes and Aphrodite. I didn't think of it as what would it be like to be a person who actually was born that way. And I couldn't get the idea out of my head of thinking, What must that have been like? Who is this child? What did they go through? And I began to do some research, and I learned that with most children, a decision is made one way or the other. And at that time, it was not very much different from the way it is now. That still happens in most cases. The only cases that I've heard where it doesn't happen are where the parents are scientists and doctors, and they know too much, and they give the child a choice. But ordinary people, an ordinary young couple that has a baby, this is way more common than we think. It just disappears. It's hidden from, it's corrected. A couple that has a child like this, it seems like the right thing to do. It seems like, oh, things would be so much easier if we make a decision, if we have the child be the most believable thing that it can be. Is the child most believable as a girl or as a boy? To me, that inability or unwillingness to accept ambiguity in many phases of life reaches a kind of heightened status in this very literal and very real way of being that some people have to go through. The next part that I'm going to read, Wayne is much older, and he's in St. John's, and the secret is out. He knows this about his body, and after a lot of things have happened, he's decided to see what will happen if he allows the Annabelle side of himself to come forward. The wind in St. John's was not like Labrador wind. Here it was damp. It sneaked under Wayne's jacket and unnerved him until he had got a good hot coffee in him at Shelley's. Forest Road was not a home, and as the winter progressed, he regretted having rented it. Home, when he had finished making his deliveries for the day, became Shelley's all-day breakfast between George Street and Williams Lane, or the Ship Inn, where he heard old unaccompanied songs on Wednesday nights, or afterwards books across from the courthouse where Nag Champa incense mixed with the aromas of free coffee and musty editions of How Green Was My Valley, and by Grand Central Station I sat down and wept. Home was the alleys through which Wayne walked back to Forest Road, looking in other people's lit windows where there were children and sunflowers in vases on the floor, and fireplaces that had once burnt coal but now had sheets of tin screwed over them and little electric heaters on the hearths. Spring aches on Forest Road once you get past the gingerbread houses. There isn't one piece of softness through March or April. Oh, Henry wrappers in the gutter, black snowbanks with bubbling holes. Every dog turd excreted over the winter has found its way to the edge of the sidewalk, and these too have the bubbles. Everything melting has the bubbles. You don't want to stand on the bubbling crust, but the town does not clean the sidewalks. Wayne had no choice but to crunch the mess as he walked back and forth between Forest Road and the harbor front, where at least there were boats, cranes, women with high heels, men with briefcases, and street people sitting in the doorways of coffee shops begging, their dogs wearing cowboy scarves. He saw a reflection of his loneliness on the street, where regulars wove in with the people who worked in the shops and banks and law offices. He watched who gave panhandlers and buskers money and who did not. He watched the constabulary clear corners where men played busted harmonicas. He learned names. Caroline Yetman stood playing a Sears guitar at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Paul Toomey sat on his parka in front of the gypsy tea room, making portraits with broken pastels. Betty Flanagan pushed her shopping cart from the East End post office to the old Woolworths building in a pair of silver platforms. "Have you been to Corner Brook?" Betty asked Wayne. "I used to teach school in Corner Brook. I taught at Broadway School for 17 years. Hobo Bill sat on George Street reading Dostoevsky. "I have never," he told Wayne after asking for a quarter, "asked a woman for spare change, and I never will." Joanne Doheny, the oldest waitress at Shelley's, daily gave Hobo Bill 3 coffees, a BLT, and a tub of vegetable barley soup. "That Bill," Joanne told Wayne, has not had a bath for the past however many years I've seen him around Water Street. I don't know how you can stand out there talking to him. I don't have all that many people to talk to. You got no friends, a fine-looking fellow like you, if you combed your hair and tucked in that shirt, you look like you could talk about anything you wanted, more intelligent than a lot of them out there. How come you don't make more of yourself? You could get a nice, smart girl up at the university. There was only one girl I ever liked talking to. That's what you put me in mind of, someone up at the university. You're not, though, are you? What girl? Joanne Doheny didn't mind asking a customer anything. This one would be out of her hair after his second refill. It wasn't like she had to sit and listen to him all day. When we were kids, Wayne said, her name was Wally Michelin. She wanted to be an opera singer. Yeah, well, I wanted to be the Sugar Plum Fairy. Joanne hoisted a tray filled with stainless steel teapots through the swinging doors. She was in her 50s, but there was something expressive in the turn of her wrist. Wayne did not remember ever hearing people talk about the beauty of wrists. The little bone like an ankle bone. He noticed it again when she came out. Did you really want to be a dancer? Joanne rolled her eyes, took the empty Heinz bottle, opened it, squirted in new ketchup from the kitchen's generic mother bottle, and wiped the Heinz cap with a dish rag. I dance by myself in the kitchen when no one's around. If you could see into houses all over St. John's and all over Newfoundland for that matter, and while we're at it, all over the whole world, I suppose, you'd see women dancing by themselves. Men don't know that. Now, you're probably one of 3 or 4 dozen men in the world who do know, because I've told you, but you're still only a boy. You'll forget. Wayne smelled Javix, perspiration, and ivory soap escaping from under Joanne's uniform. I really did want to be the Sugar Plum Fairy. You thought I was joking about that, didn't you? He did not tell her that he'd always danced alone in his room to music on the radio, and that he still did it now in his apartment on Forest Road. That he danced and watched the shadows of his body on the wall and tried to connect the music's beauty with those shadows. Street lamps soaked through the window from Forest Road, their light soaked into his shirt, and in the dark you could not see it was a man's shirt. You saw that it folded, that it was cotton, that it draped. What was beauty? Not frailness, not smallness. Wayne looked at his arms and tried to imagine them holding Joanne with her expressive wrists circled around him. That was how lovers' limbs were. Years of hormones had made him angular, and it occurred to him that he wished he could stop taking them. He wanted to stop swallowing them every day and having them alter his body from what it wanted to be into what the world desired from it. He wanted to throw the pills down a toilet here in Shelley's all-day breakfast, where no one knew him anyway, unless you counted Joanne, and she did not really know anything about him. He wanted to throw the pills away and wait and see what would happen to his body, how much of his body image was accurate, and how much of it was a construct he'd come to believe. He tried to see his body objectively. If he squinted, it could look softer. If he stopped taking the pills, might his breasts bud as they had done at puberty? He was afraid of having breasts. But were breasts beautiful? Could anyone tell him? At night, when he danced alone, his body wanted to be water, but it was not water. It was a man's body, and a man's body was frozen. Wayne was frozen, and the girl self trapped inside him was cold. He did not know what he could do to melt the frozen man. I think when I was working on that part, the idea of how much of the body image is accurate and how much of it is a construct that he had come to believe, I think anybody could feel like that. I could feel like that. You know, you could feel like that if you were not intersex. Sometimes I took daily things out of daily life that could happen to anybody and gave them to Wayne, because I didn't want his life to be one medical catastrophe after another. I didn't want him to be labeled. I didn't want him to be some kind of, have some kind of otherness. I wanted to write about him and his real life just the same as your real life or anybody's real life or my real life. After the book came out, I did have some reaction from intersex people and some from lots of people on the gender spectrum at different parts of it, but it was the intersex people whose reaction I was most afraid of, because I thought they might say, well, actually, Kathleen, it's not like that at all. But I was really, really moved by their reaction. And one of them cried and told me that because this book had some hope in it, it was the only ray of hope about her own condition that she had ever seen in print, and that her life had actually been really tragic, and that she felt really grateful for the sort of open windows in the book and the idea of possibility. I had a letter from another intersex person who told me that she puts the book in her purse, and when there's a Remembrance Day ceremony, she goes down to the cenotaph with the book in her purse so she won't feel lonely. And she kind of incorporates the ceremony as if it's also for herself, and the book is her companion. So having that kind of reaction means more to me than just about anything else. And I think some writers think, and I know I thought, what right do I have to write about this person when I don't really know what it's like to live that life? So I'm just grateful that these readers think it's okay. And I think part of it has to do with the power of art. I think you can transcend your own situation sometimes and try to see things from other people's perspective. You might not always be accurate, but sometimes you might be more accurate than you think. So this other part that I'm going to read is a little bit further on. Road Deluxe was a funny, steep little road that took you from Waterford Bridge Road to the Village Mall on Topsail Road. It was just a poky little hill with a name that raised your expectations. What it had on it was a shop called Value Best Convenience, which looked as if it could have been there from a time before the street had acquired its name. Envelopes sat next to matches and emergency candles and ladies' dress gloves. Wayne noticed a box of loose combs and thought about the length of his hair. He had not had it cut lately because he did not want to go into a barber shop and have the barber look at him closely and ask what kind of back and sides he preferred. With his body's new softness, the breasts, and the new shape of Annabelle, a man's haircut would have looked stranger than hair that had some freedom in it. He had never needed to shave as his father shaved, faithfully every morning, and he had never possessed stubble or what people call 5 o'clock shadow. His face had always been smooth, though had he not shaved, there would have been some downy facial hair, gold and soft. He bought a razor and a comb, but if he was going to grow into the softness of Annabelle, he did not want to have a man's barbered head or face. He did not know what he wanted, but he knew he did not want to continue to pretend to be a man. At the top of Road Deluxe, he decided to cross Topsail Road to the mall. He took his new comb and razor into the men's washroom near the food court and shaved the almost invisible down from beneath his ears, no more than exists on the faces of many girls. The soap from the dispenser had a chemical scent. His hair, as he used the new comb, reminded him of the soft ferns that would, at this time of year, be sending up feathery heads along the creek behind his parents' house in Labrador. Had his face ever been a man's face? He checked his Adam's apple by swallowing. Was it as big as a man's? He could imagine the answer being either yes or no. Wayne wished he could tell, but his own face was too familiar. A man came in to use the urinals and looked at him suspiciously. The man carried his wallet in his back pocket and there was a faded square of denim around it. The man zippered his fly and shot Wayne a look that had disgust and fear in it. Maybe Frank King had not been far off the mark at all when he had told Wayne he didn't look too good these days. The mall always felt to Wayne as if it were trying to convince him of an illusion that he was not quite getting, that the world was a place of glittering lights, that you could show you loved someone by giving her a new mug with a little white bear inside it. He had once come in to find socks and realized that in all the mall's 116 stores, there was not one pair of socks his father would have worn. He looked now in the windows of those stores and tried to catch sight of himself as if he were looking at a stranger. He tried to see, in the transparent reflections of himself walking against racks of blazers and halter tops and Italian-style dinnerware, what other people saw when they looked at him. Were his shoulders hunched? He tried to straighten them, but this thrust his chest out in a way that disquieted him. In the window of Fairweather hung a sweater that looked as if it was the color it had been when it lived on the sheep. It was a woman's sweater, but what made it a woman's? He went into the store to touch it. He pulled the neck to see the size. It was size 8. A salesgirl asked him if she could help. He felt embarrassed. He wanted to know what the sweater would look like on him. Have you got this in a larger size? What size would you like? How do the sizes work? Well, an 8 is about my size. I need it for someone bigger. Are they big-boned or are they tall? Tall. Wayne was guessing now. He suspected the salesgirl did not want to say the word fat. He was not fat. You can bring it back if it doesn't suit. You have to return it within 14 days, unworn, tags attached. Would you like to try a 12 or a 14? 14. Wayne wondered how the salesgirl would know if a garment had been worn. He wondered how long you had to wear something before the fact of your having worn it would show. He paid for the sweater and went into a shoe store. Women's shoes were small, but it was not just that they were small. They had insubstantial soles. He picked up a black pump. It was as light as a piece of toast. He couldn't imagine standing in it without the whole thing crumbling. He was 5'9" and weighed 150 pounds, and he knew there were women of that height and weight who were considered normal women. But these shoes did not seem to him to be able to support his weight. Were male pounds denser than female pounds? A clerk saw him standing with a shoe in his hand. He saw a woman's lace-up walking shoe on a bottom shelf. It looked more promising, but still the toe was tapered. "Do you have this shoe?" he asked, in a size 10. Wayne remembered that when they were children, Wally Michelin's feet had been the same size as his own, but the sizes on their shoes had been different. "We have up to 41 in European sizes. That's about a 10, and it depends on the make." "Can I see it?" She brought the shoe, and with it a green shoe Wayne liked. It was the color of birch leaves, and he bought the pair. In Susie Shear there were plain skirts with a back slit that came just past the knee, but he could not bring himself to buy a skirt. Behind the skirts were pants made of the same material. Women's slacks. What made them women's? He held a pair and regarded its seams. They were flatter than men's seams. Women's slacks were held together much more lightly. He paid $29 and hoped they would not fall apart. A sign proclaimed a 3 for $10 special on ladies' trouser socks. It said they were a staple in any woman's wardrobe, and Wayne bought some. He wanted to change in the washroom, but knew he couldn't go in the men's toilets to do this. There was a washroom whose door had a blue wheelchair painted on it, and when he opened the door, he saw this was just one room, with a toilet, sink, and mirror, and he went in. He put the sweater on, and the slacks and the green shoes. He put his old shirt and jeans and workbooks, boots in the Fairweather bag and the shoe store bag. He stayed in there for a long time and checked that the door was locked. He looked at himself in the mirror. He was shaven and wearing the slacks and the shoes, but it was still impossible for him to tell whether he looked anything like a woman. He suspected he did not. The only way he could see how the shoes looked on him was if he raised his knee very high and rested one foot on the platform in front of the mirror. There was a small heel on the shoe, half an inch, and it did look like a convincing slope, his foot sloping into the green leather the way women's feet sloped. He kept his eye on the door handle, and when the handle moved, he tried to put his foot back on the floor, and he lost his balance and wrenched his leg. He took the slacks off and put his jeans back on with the new socks still on under them. But then he changed his mind again. He put the slacks back on and the shoes. The shoes were tight. He wished they had the next size up. He wished he could see himself from the back. If he saw himself from the back, he might get a fresh perspective. He might know whether or not his body had anything like a feminine air. The mall was a place with hundreds of people in it, maybe 1,000 people, and none of them knew him. He could walk through it once and see how it felt. He decided to go to the drugstore and buy himself a hand mirror so he could look at the back of his body in the mirror. He could not remember the last time he had seen the back of his body, or if he had ever seen it. So I'd like to open up the floor if anybody has any questions about the writing process, the story itself, Wayne, or anything you want to ask me. Yes. The question is writing style. How do I think mine evolved? Was it influenced? And how did I get it? I've written many unpublished books, many unpublishable books. I have lots of manuscripts that didn't work. So yes, I developed the style over a lot of trial and error. And my natural gift that I know I have is character and atmosphere. I could go on and on and on telling you about the atmosphere and what a certain character was like, and you'd go, yeah, woman, where's the story? And that was the problem with all of my other manuscripts. I didn't have a structure. So for me, what I wanted to do with this and the style of this, my number one word in my mind was clarity. I wanted to have clarity. I wanted the reader to have a clear picture of what I was seeing and of what was going on. And anything that was like overly wordy or poetic or atmospheric or too much, I'm a cutter. I cut things out. So I try to cut as much out as possible while still being clear. I think I must have been influenced because I've read a lot all my life. Some of my favorite writers are Catherine Mansfield and Chekhov and Heinrich Böll, and I think the thing that I love in writing is if I sense compassion and humanity that is not sentimental. I don't want to read anything that's sentimental, but neither do I want to read anything that is cold and heartless. So that's pretty much all I can say about that. Any other questions? I hadn't noticed that, but I can't deny it. Because as soon as you say it, I can see where it is in the book. So all I can do, like I can't say, oh yeah, this is what I was doing about the theme of beauty. I can't say that. I can only tell you how I feel about it. And I mean, that's a very profound thing that you just said. A beauty that you yearn for that's unattainable and has a connection with death. Wow, I'm only just starting to explore that consciously now in my life because I'm 52 and my connection with death is getting stronger. I went to the dentist and he cheerfully did one of those panoramas and plastered it up on the wall. And you're looking at your skeleton, right? The guy is showing you your skeleton. It's you know, it's this part of your skull. And so you can't help but realize your mortality when you reach middle age, even if you've been blithely ignoring it all along. So for me, the connection of beauty with death is something that I'm only just beginning to explore. But the idea of it being unattainable and the idea of yearning for something, which does happen all through this book. That has been something that has been with me as a personal theme since I was 12 years old. And I experienced a kind of I used to call it an aesthetic transfixion. It was like suddenly a thing came over me where I realized that life is sacred and there's more to it than the material world. And look at how illuminated all the people are and everything. And oh, I just had a moment of enlightenment, but now it's gone and I'm in the mall. And that whole clash between the glory of life and the mundane of the everyday, and even worse than that, the brutality and the nastiness and the evil that exists. This is starting to sound religious, but I don't mean it to. I can't deny that those things are always on my mind. Okay, so the question is about medical facts of being intersex. I won't, in case people haven't read the book, I won't go into great detail, but there are things that happen that anything that happens medically in the book is something that I either researched and put in for my research or was told about. There was one important thing that I was told had happened to somebody. When I did the research, I found out that this was not supposed to be a possibility. And I considered all of this, and I decided that that was one of the great things about writing fiction instead of nonfiction. And I decided that for the purposes of my story, and because I know that sometimes things that are not supposed to happen actually do happen, it didn't go out of the realm of possibility for me. But I do understand that it does for some people, and I'm okay with that. The question is, did I ever live in Labrador? No. I only stayed and was there for, maybe a week or two at a time. Well, one thing that I was really fortunate to do was go and live with the Inuit in their tents outside of the community of Sheshatshiu when they go on the land and they go hunting and living on the land in the summertime. I had worked on a documentary about a young Innu musician, and I'd stayed with her family in these tents. So I was there for about a week, and I mean, that's not really a scene that happens in the book, but it was an experience that allowed me to really feel the land. And I also stayed with trappers like Treadway in their homes. So I learned a lot about their lives from staying with them. So the question is, did I ever consider the opposite? And the answer is yes, I did. I had not read Middlesex, and I still haven't, which I think is the opposite. I mean, it's a completely different book. But so it was kind of lucky for me that I chose the one I chose, because then it would have been, another book about but I did. But I really wanted to explore the question of what is femaleness. And I wasn't so interested in the question of what is masculinity. And I think that's because growing up female, I was really interested in looking at what bits of that are imposed and what bits are real. And I have a sneaking suspicion that none of it is real. So I was personally more interested in that one. So the question is, do I get the feeling, and at what point on any subject or any story do I get the feeling I'm onto something and I have to keep going with this? I get that before I write the first word. So I'm walking along in my life, and I'm going to my choir practice. My dad told me I couldn't sing when I was a kid, and so I never joined a choir until one day the urge to sing was just so stupendous, I had to audition for a choir, and they let me in. And they happened to have a conductor who, every time I'd stand up and sing, it made me feel like the conductor in this book, where I felt like the composer is in the room with us, and the composer is writing the music, and it's coming through that guy. It's actually coming through him. He's a conductor. and it's going into me. And I had that feeling, and I thought, and I wrote a short story about it before this, because of the intensity of that emotional event in my life, going from somebody whose dad said she couldn't sing to realizing what a conductor is and feeling the energy, and it's like a powerful body thing. So that's when I knew I had to write that story. Another thing happened. I've had this friend, she's my oldest friend since grade 4, and she got married really young. She wanted me to wear a puffy bridesmaid dress at her wedding, and I wouldn't even go because I was going to be a bohemian globetrotter, and I couldn't stand the thought of domestic bliss. But she still loves me, and I still love her, right? She forgave me for that. Imagine. And many, many, many years later, she's still with this guy. They were never compatible, but they always managed to, have this marriage. And then one day she tells me this story that's so sad, it brings me to tears, because it's the story of how this stoic husband of hers, he's an engineer, and he's completely incapable of any flights of fancy. He has no imagination on a certain level. On the engineering level he does, but they can't talk to each other. And she keeps having affairs, okay? But finally one night, he's like the horse that would burst his heart for you. Like he's a plodding along kind of guy. And I love my friend, but she put him through hell all these years. And finally one day, she's gone out down to the spur, the bar. She's having an affair with the drummer, and he's aware that she's doing this, and he breaks, and something in him breaks, and he starts trashing everything in the house. He's just like a horse that's just gone. The horse burst his heart for her. He did everything he could for her, but they were never compatible, and it was tragic. And she's telling me all this. She's saying, like, he broke all the glasses. He broke everything in the china cabinet. He broke all the Christmas decorations. He went ballistic. The neighbors called the police. And I was really moved by it, and I was in tears. So I start to write a story about it, because I had to get it out somehow. And when I started to write the story, I started to snicker, and I started bursting out laughing, and I started to find the whole thing, the story version changed and became really hilarious. I don't know why. It's like it went in the pressure cooker and it came out a different shape. And but the impulse was, again, it's from when something hits me with an emotional intensity that I can't contain, that's when I know I'm onto something. Now, for a story like this, it wasn't my emotional intensity, it wasn't my friend, it was about a stranger. Someone told me about a stranger, but I knew that there was emotional intensity in there and that it was a story. Sometimes I know it's a story, and sometimes it's just not. And it's when I feel that pressure. It's when I feel there's something explosive there. And if I can understand it, it's no good. It has to be something I don't understand. So I write into it, not until I understand it, but until I get rid of that feeling like it's suffocating me with its intensity and its power, and I'm going to explode. It's a mystery. I mean, just yesterday, I read online that a 10-year-old girl in Illinois, in a small town called, I don't know, it wasn't Farmville, but something like that. She killed herself. She hung herself in the bedroom closet because she had years of bullying. And it came to a head when she cut her hair short. And they started calling her a boy, but it was all gender-based. All of the bullying was gender-based. And there's a scene of real brutality in this story that I wanted to take out. I don't like writing things like that. I don't like writing violence. But, so I wrote it in there, and I thought about taking it out, and then I did some looking up at the murders that are done of people intersex people, transgendered people, people who just don't conform to, you know, the norm, so-called. And this violence is all around us, and it's done through words, and it's done through, so if my story can help those interactions to be different, like even one time in the whole universe, that's an amazing thing. So thank you for telling me that. Thank you all so much.